Good morning, and I know that you are surprised to hear me say good morning, because you were expecting good evening. But this is really a good morning, and this is a good morning in Hawaii. You see, you should be listening to the last evening of the Chicago closed class, which evidently was a very good lesson. It was so good that none of us noticed that we hadn't turned on the machine. And at the end, we came out of our spellbinding session to find that not one word had been recorded. But some of our students had taken notes. And so I took these notes with me on to Cincinnati, and there used these in a lesson which was recorded. And even though the message may not have been exactly the same in words, it was essentially the same in essence. And when we played back the tape, we found that the recording head of the machine had been broken, and so none of it was preserved. And I have an idea that the meaning of all this is that something more important than that lesson must be brought to our attention as a closing session for such a class as we had in Chicago. Well, since that night in Chicago and that evening in Cincinnati, I have been all around the world, and have given classes in New York, made a trip to Puerto Rico for some healing work, the Virgin Islands, and then all the way across the Atlantic to London for lecture and class work, and as you know, over to Holland, up into Sweden, Germany, Switzerland, and so on, around the world and back here to Hawaii. And in my mail, I'm receiving continuous reminders that there is a blank side to this tape, and why not do something about it, and why not complete this tape. And I've had several reminders from Lorraine, and as you can well imagine, many more reminders from our Emma Lindsay out here in Hawaii. But nothing has happened. That is, nothing happened until yesterday. And out here in my home, on a very peaceful, quiet day, Emma set up the machines and let me listen to the fifth night of the Chicago class. That is, that which is on the other side of this tape. The subject is a higher view of God, of prayer, and of the self. And I would like you to know that listening to that tape has caused a tremendous movement of consciousness within me. So much so that I closed up the house before 6 p.m. and retired. Not to sleep, because until 10 o'clock I just lie there in bed thinking upon what I had heard, pondering the depth of the message, wondering what effect it really would have on our students if they ever decided to put that tape into practice and attempt to demonstrate it. At 10 o'clock I got up and fixed myself a hot bowl of soup. Went back to bed and still couldn't sleep. It was after midnight. And the subject of this tape was still stirring me. Well, it is now something after 9 o'clock in the morning, and I've had a few hours of sleep, but I'm still haunted. I'm still deep in meditation, and I don't seem able to throw off the effects of what I heard. I wonder how many of you, listening to the other side of this tape, have felt yourself stirred and moved from head to foot to such an extent that you never want to hear another word of truth in all your life. That your only hope is that you can demonstrate one tiny portion of this message. I know that the effect on me is that I want nothing more than to teach one more class on the subject of prayer, but on the subject of prayer as you already have it on this tape, but teach it in such a way that that which I feel in my soul, this deep stirring within me, so that it can translate itself to you, impart itself to you, so that you feel what I feel and know what I know, and then go on and demonstrate to the full capacity of your understanding. In one of our recent letters, the subject of prayer brought out a statement that we must resist the temptation to pray. That every time we resisted the temptation to pray, we were praying. Isn't that a strange statement? Every time we resist the temptation to pray, we are praying. How can that be? Well, of course, sitting out here in the islands, you very quickly become aware of things that in city life you miss. They escape your attention, or rather, your attention is not so readily drawn to them as you would be in the country or at the seashore, and more especially where you would be in peace, in quiet, in a reflective mood. Now what I'm trying to say is this, that in the evenings, for instance, I may be sitting out on the lanai, and I become conscious of the stars overhead. You can't help that. The stars out here in mid-Pacific shine by the billions, not by the millions, but literally by the billions. The skies are just heavily covered with stars. Some are so tiny that they're but flickering lights, and others are really large. Once in a while you see one or two stars close to the moon, and these stars are as large as baseballs. Right close to them is that brilliant moon. Now, once in a while, something up there in that sky strikes you, and one of the things is this. Off at a certain angle, you see the Southern Cross, and if you are near the beach along about 8 o'clock in the evening or 8:30, you first become aware of the Southern Cross leaning far to the left, leaning so far to the left that it's almost on its side. But as you watch, this cross gradually rises until it is standing straight up. And then you see this cross, as you would see a crucifix in a church or on a steeple, standing straight up with arms outstretched. But you're only watching that for a short while, and then you notice that this cross begins to lean to the right. And gradually it goes over on its side to the right until it disappears from view. Now, of course, this in itself is an extraordinary thing to watch, but after you have seen it a few dozen times, and remember that the same thing happens every night, you begin to realize that there is a law and order about this event, that there is an activity behind the event producing this experience every night. Well, so it is with the moonrise out here. Because of the fact that on one side of the mountain you see the moonrise as it slowly comes above this mountain and rises into the sky. But on the other side of the mountain, you see it in an entirely different way. Again, you are led to the ultimate conclusion that there is law and order in this rising of the moon. You hear that automobile going by? Well, we don't have that very often out here where I am. It just had to happen for your special benefit on this tape. Actually, this is one of the most quiet spots in all this island, and far away from any of its noises and tourist activities. Well, now, again, As you sit here by the beach, you're aware of this ebb and flow of the tides twice in 24 hours. The regularity of it, the orderliness of it, the beauty of it too. And of course, with the flowers, this is really a continuous miracle. Now, in pondering this, in connection with the word prayer, can you see, as I do, how sinful it would be to pray for the Southern Cross to rise in the sky, or to move from its left side to straight up, and from straight up to over on its right side, or to pray for the tide to come in or the tide to go out? Would it not seem sinful to pray for these beautiful flowers to bloom, when all one has to do is sit here and behold, and the miracles take place before your very eyes without desiring it, without any over-eagerness for it to take place, just beholding it, watching this great mystery of life unfold itself, disclose itself, reveal itself, all for your benefit and mine? Is it any wonder that Scripture sounds so wonderful when you hear that the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth forth his handiwork? Isn't it a miracle that the great prophets of old saw that man needs do nothing about these great miracles except enjoy them, behold them, be grateful that there is a God, that there is an infinite wisdom, a divine love, and that it has created all these things for its own glory. Do you know a secret? That means for your glory and for mine. For God's only existence is as you and as me. God's only existence is as you and as me. Take us out of the world and there'd be no God. And so, this whole heaven and earth were created for your sake and for mine. And do you doubt that your body was created for your pleasure and use? Certainly, as well as God made beautiful flowers, oceans, the heavens, as well as God has stocked this earth with the good things for you and for me, do you doubt for a moment that he created your body for you, for your pleasure, for your use, for your expression? Now, we have seen before this that there is no use to pray for supply. This whole world is full of supply. Even if you wish to be as practical as to think in terms of meat and potatoes, vegetables, poultry, eggs, milk. You know there's an abundance, an overabundance of these things in the world. There's no use to pray for them. And of course, all of the materials for our clothing: wool, cotton, silk, and now these artificial materials. The world is overstocked with these. There's no use praying for them. Silver, gold, the world is overstocked with these. More silver, more gold, more platinum buried in the earth than man can ever use. No use praying for these. Fresh air, clear water, no use praying for these. Then, if it is not necessary to pray for all of these things, what is there left to pray for? A healthy body? Oh no. God couldn't have given us so much of His grace expressed in infinite supply without having also given us perfect bodies. There can be no use of praying about our bodies. And if you count all of the people in the world, you'll know there's no use praying for companionships. There are enough people in the world so that everyone can have an abundance of companions. So you see, as you sit here watching the orderly processes of nature, or what we call nature, more especially after you have perceived the invisible activity of the Spirit as it appears outwardly as these harmonies of nature, as we have seen in the message of the infinite way, more then do you see the futility of praying for anything. Now you see, at first, this seems to wipe out prayer and the need for prayer. But that's only at first glance. Because something in your heart tells you that prayer is a glorious thing. That prayer is one of the most beautiful experiences on earth. Something within you tells you that prayer must be the very voice of God, the very atmosphere of God, the very consciousness of God. Something within you tells you that prayer is a sacred thing. It has even told me that prayer is a secret thing. I have understood what the Master meant when he said that we must pray in secret, that we should not pray to be seen of men, that we should not gather in places where men can see us pray, but that we must retire into a sanctuary, an inner sanctuary, a secret place of the Most High, the 91st Psalm calls it, and there pray. But not pray for things, but not pray for conditions, not pray to or for. Just pray. Just pray. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. I live in thy grace. And thy grace lives in me. The Lord is my shepherd. Because the Lord's grace is my sufficiency. The Lord cares for me as the Lord cares for the sun, the moon, the stars, the plants, and the planets. I live and move and have my being in God's order, in God's grace. God must love his Son, that he created this whole world for his Son, for you and for me. It's more wonderful to me to know that God loves me than to know that I love God. Perhaps I only love God because God loves me. God's love is expressed as my love. God's love is reflected by my love. Without God's love, there could be no my love. Without God's loving me, I couldn't love God. Do you see that love is a two-way activity? It must be so, much more so than in human experience. It isn't very difficult for us to love those who love us. It is very difficult to love someone who has little or no feeling for us. And so I'm not too much concerned about my love for God, because that wouldn't exist at all, except for God's love for me. Now, you know, just pondering that is a deep prayer. Just realizing God's love for his universe, God's care of these beautiful flowers and trees, God's care for his children. This is prayer. And in this prayer, I have no desires. I have no desire that God should love me more than he does. I have no desire that God should care for me more than he does. I have no feeling that God should be doing more than God is doing. If anything, my desire is that I may have more time to appreciate God's love and what God's love is doing in my life, in my mind, in my soul, in my body, in my purse. I wouldn't be surprised that if I took more time for looking out of this window, as I'm looking out now while I'm talking to you, and pondered more these beautiful coconut palms, trees with as many as 50 coconuts in one tree. Flowers out here in infinite form and color, and variety, the steady flow of the ocean. I think if I took more time to realize that none of this would be but for the love of God for His Son, that He has given the sun that we might have light, that He has given us the moon that we might have light by night, that He has given us this ocean that we may travel, that we may be fed. He has given us these breezes that we may be cooled. And you know, right out there in that salt ocean, there are springs of fresh water. Actually, springs of fresh water bubble up through the sand right in that saltwater ocean. Oh yes, there are places where kids dive down and drink fresh water right while swimming in the saltwater ocean. Seems impossible, doesn't it? But God has provided for our every need. Prayer is a most wonderful thing when it is a contemplation of the beauties of God, of the bounties of God. Prayer is a most wonderful thing when it is a contemplation of the activity of God in our experience, or the activity of God in the experience of the world. Prayer of contemplation. This makes one a contemplative. And yet, can you not see that it doesn't take you out of the world? It really doesn't mean that you have to leave the world to contemplate God's grace. You can just take a spare hour or two on Saturday afternoon or Sunday morning, or an evening, or perhaps even retire at 8 or 9 at night and get up at midnight and go out for a walk, or 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning. Go out for a walk. Go somewhere where you can see the sky or the sea or a lake, and contemplate. Be a contemplative. Be in prayer. Be in communion with God. And then very quickly you will understand why it has been given to me to see that desire is a sin. Unless the desire is for a greater contemplation of God and the things of God and the thoughts of God. For God's thoughts are certainly not our thoughts. And I'm sure you know that our thoughts could never be God's thoughts. No, no. We think too highly of God to believe that God could ever be guilty of some of our thoughts. And so we know that our thoughts are not God's thoughts. But there's no reason why God's thoughts cannot become our thoughts if we become contemplatives, if we learn to contemplate as a form of prayer rather than desire. Even expect. Yes, expectancy can be prayer if our expectancy is that of watching the bud become the flower, that of watching the moonless sky suddenly be filled with the light of the moon, or on sunrise to all of a sudden see that first bit of light break across the sky, and then sitting in expectancy as the sun rises and the fullness of light and warmth reaches us. But when expectancy is that God shall move outside of its orbit to obey our direction, supplications, personal desires, then prayer becomes a sin. In 1950, in the midst of our Hollywood class, I said that there never would be another Infinite Way class unless more were revealed to me on the subject of prayer. And we've had many classes since then, but each one of them has been toward a higher concept of prayer. Each one of them has been a recognition that we have not yet arrived at the fullness of the understanding of prayer. I know now that prayer is my only contact with God. I know now that it is only through prayer that the beauties and the activities and the joys, the grace of God can reach me. I know now that there is no way to come into or under God's government than through prayer. And so these years have been, ever since 1950, have all been spent with that one word on my lips, prayer. What is prayer? Give me more understanding of prayer, a higher understanding of the nature of prayer. What is true prayer? And you see, as you go back over the writings since then, and over the recordings, over the classwork, you will see how much time and effort and thought has been devoted to this subject of prayer. When we are in prayer, we are enfolded in God. Not only when we are in moments set apart from our usual activities of life, no. Because we can be in prayer while engaged in any of our human activities, whether it's housekeeping, marketing, shopping, conducting a business, bookkeeping, painting. Oh yes, driving an automobile. We can be in prayer because we can be contemplating God. We can be reserving an area of our consciousness for the contemplation of God's presence. We can be beholding God's presence in every activity going on about us. We can be lifting our thought to God. We can be opening our inner ear to hear the still small voice. We can be realizing that our inner eye is beholding the universe of spirit even while our physical eyes are engaged in physical activities. Yes, we can live the life of a contemplative. even while we are in the world, because the Master prayed, not that we be taken out of the world, but not of it. Prayer. The higher concepts of prayer. Prayer in which we no longer turn to God for anything but the joy of basking in His presence, in His grace, in His love. Prayer in which we contemplate the infinite ways that God has of loving us. Of loving us. Don't be concerned about your love for God. That will follow in a normal and natural way, and you'll give expression to it. It may not be with words. It may not be with words. It isn't always those who tell us much of their love for us who really love us the most. Actions speak louder than words. Don't give too much thought about your love for God. Contemplate God's love for you. Contemplate God's love for His kingdom. See the manifold ways, the infinite forms of God's love for His creation. Yes? Contemplate God's love. See how in God's love there is no criticism, there is no judgment, there is no condemnation, there are no yesterdays. Isn't it wonderful to know that in God's love there are no yesterdays? God's love is flowing now. It cannot withhold itself. It cannot give itself. God's love is a state of is, a state of being. And we are realizing it. We are feeling it. We are contemplating it. We are pondering. We are meditating upon God's love and in God's love and through God's love until God's love so permeates our consciousness that we no longer pray. We are only aware of being in prayer. Prayer is a contemplation of God's love for His kingdom. Prayer is a realization of God's presence filling all space. Prayer is a contemplation of light, of love, of peace, of joy. Prayer is an inner stillness and a silence. Prayer is a refraining from much thought. Prayer is a refraining from desire. Do you begin to see now why, whatever message there was, on this side of the tape was twice obliterated. It was so that our attention could be drawn again and again to the other side of this tape, so that our attention might be centered on the fact that we already had revealed to us a higher concept of prayer, and that we mustn't race ahead too fast, but that we must return again and again now to both sides of this tape until we have learned a prayer that is a resting, a prayer that is a contemplation, a prayer that is an inner communion, if you will, a prayer that is a realization of is. God's grace is my sufficiency in all things. God's love is enveloping me and this universe. God's peace is upon this world. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. The Lord is leading me beside the still waters. Yes, wherever I am, the Lord is. Even sometimes when I make my bed in hell, Thou art there. And should I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, Thou art there. My prayer is this holy contemplation that where Thou art, I am. That where I am, Thou art. That I am ever with Thee, as Thou hast said, Son, Thou art ever with me, and all that I have is Thine, all that I have is Thine. I, that I in the midst of You, that I in the midst of me. My prayer is a contemplation of is. God is. Life is. Love is. Joy is. In Thy presence is the fullness of life. In Thy presence is the fullness of life. Only in Thy presence is the fullness of life. Now, I know how to pray. And my prayer is an outflowing of gratitude. An outpouring of gratitude that Thou art. That I am. That all Thou art, I am. My prayer is a heart full of gratitude that Thou hast given us the heavens and the earth for our glory. And perhaps I can even be grateful that there are still greater blessings in prayer than I have ever dreamed of before. Perhaps there are greater depths of prayer than I have ever known. Perhaps there are greater blessings to come from prayer and through prayer than any I have ever experienced. But this I know: prayer is contemplation. Prayer is beholding. Prayer is witnessing God's grace. And now, even though it is Friday morning, and the beautiful sunshiny Friday morning in Hawaii, perhaps the time has come for me to say adieu on the last evening of our Chicago class in 1954. Aloha, and I hope you feel the tremendous beauty of this magnificent Hawaiian morning.